Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina, and on behalf of Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program. Not just another AI session, Practical Applications in Academic Libraries, which is sponsored by Elsevier. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. I'll put a couple links in the chat where you can register for upcoming webinars and watch previous webinar recordings. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. To adjust the size of the slides or video, you can use the divider in the middle of the screen to slide the sizes to your liking. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to submit questions or comments for our speakers. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions you'd like or would like to be addressed. Also, there's closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the Show Captions button on the bottom panel of your screen. You can also turn on automated translation for the captions by clicking the arrow button, toggling on translation, and selecting your preferred language. Also, please note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with links to the recording and to today's slides. Also, if you're interested in library technology, LibTech Insights, or LTI, is a content vertical from Choice that examines the day-to-day impact of library and education technology on academic librarians, researchers, and students. The channel provides practical guidance on technology trends and products, including AI and AI literacy, user experience, useful tools, and job profiles, all of which are written by and for librarians. You can find out more about LTI and read the blog via the links in the chat. We send one email a week with our latest posts and some handpicked tech news stories, usually in the realm of AI. Okay, and with that, we are ready to get started. So I will now hand it over to Emily.
Great. Thanks so much, Sabrina. It's so great to be here. And thanks to everyone for joining us today for this session. I am delighted to be here, and I am here with two colleagues, Andrew White, the Director of Library Information Services at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and Evan Simpson, the Associate Dean of Experiential Learning and Academic Engagement from Northeastern University. And we're going to be sharing some examples of practical applications of AI in academic libraries, particularly focused on the search and discovery space. I'm going to start us off with just a brief overview of the AI landscape in libraries, highlighting some of what we've learned from recent studies. And then I will pass it off to Evan, who's going to share some experimental work they've been doing at Northeastern around integrating library discovery with AI. And Andrew will close us out with an update on how Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute has been adopting a cross-publisher library tool from Elsevier called LeapSpace. And we are definitely going to be saving time at the end for questions. So as Sabrina mentioned, please do put any questions you have into the Q&A box as you think of them. And we'll go through as many questions as we can at the end of this session. So with that, where are academic libraries in 2026, 4 years into this AI transformation that we're all living through? I want to just highlight three recent studies that I think start to show what libraries are prioritizing when it comes to AI work. And the first study I wanted to share was the recent Weak Signals report out of IFLA, the International Federation of Libraries. And this is a thought leadership piece that was written by the Emerging Leaders Fellows coming out of last year's IFLA Congress. And I think it's a really insightful report. It covers AI trends, and the title Weak signals is a term that comes from futures thinking theory. And so it's not just a look at existing trends, but it tries to predict future trends that are based on early or so-called weak signals in the environment. And the authors of this report see libraries becoming what they term generative knowledge ecosystems and highlight that libraries have an opportunity here to develop adaptive and personalized information services. Um, and they also emphasize that libraries are going to develop these kinds of services with an emphasis on safety, which I think is really key here. Um, and they also describe libraries as quote unquote trust anchors, and I absolutely love this term. I think it really captures the essence of the library's information literacy mission. Um, and I think they're seeing, and I think many are seeing academic libraries becoming central at their institutions as we all grapple with the challenges around critical thinking that are posed by AI generated content. So I recommend, if you haven't seen it, to check out that thought leadership piece from IFLA. The next study that came out earlier this year that I want to highlight is the triannual Ithaca SNR Library Director Survey. Comes out every 3 years. And once again, Elsevier is very pleased to be able to sponsor this once again. This is a survey of U.S. academic library directors, covers many topics, not just AI, but I'm just focusing on sort of the AI pieces here. And one of the findings I thought was most interesting is that we really are starting to see library directors prioritizing and planning to hire specific roles around AI. However, it's interesting to note that this investment is somewhat patchy and tends to skew towards large R1 research institutions, which perhaps is not too surprising. But they also see, similar to what IFLA showed, that the role of libraries is really centered around instruction. AI literacy is a key priority, and this idea of research integrity and ensuring trust in the scholarly record. Again, this same idea of the library as that trust anchor. And then the last study I wanted to highlight that kind of gives us an environmental scan of this space is one that we actually conducted at Elsevier ourselves. This study is called the Librarian of the Future, where we surveyed over 1,000 librarians globally in the spring of this year. And I want to be very clear that this study has not been published yet, and we are actually still in the middle of sifting through and analyzing all of the data. So what you're getting here today is a sneak preview, and really the first time we've shared this publicly. So we'll be excited to present it for real in the fall. So do keep an eye out for that, and it will be freely available to anyone who wants to dig into the data. But this is what our early kind of analysis and findings are showing. And we're really excited by these results. So what we're seeing is, again, similar to the first two studies I shared, libraries are clearly carving out a leadership role around AI literacy and instruction. 82% of respondents agreeing this is a key library role. We also see that governance, institutional AI governance is lagging somewhat. Only 30% of respondents say that they have an institutional AI governance policy. This really mirrors the results we had in our study we did last year, where we surveyed researchers and asked some of the same similar questions. They also came out at around 30% with this question. So I also think one of the more interesting findings that we're starting to see is this finding around collaboration. How libraries are increasingly seeing the need to collaborate across their institutions, whether that's IT or research, et cetera, to develop strategy around AI. So if you're interested in delving more deeply into any of these resources, these links are all going to be included in the slides that Sabrina will be sharing afterwards. And with that, I am going to hand over to Evan to tell us what's been going on at Northeastern. So over to you, Evan.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you to our organizers and mostly to all of our participants today. As you can see on the screen, I'm going to talk a little bit about our work specific to information seeking, and related to this, two of the areas we've invested a great deal of time and funding in related to discovery. I'll point to a guiding tenet related to discovery we've held up as key to enterprise-wide AI adoption, and I'll show some examples in action. In terms of a view from Northeastern, we really do see hybrid research still as the norm. Users switching between disciplinary databases, the open web, and AI tools based on the task, rarely choosing only one path. And so in a way, AI for orientation definitely established, absolutely, and databases still offer in-depth research. And some comments here: conversational AI are increasingly used for quick background and starting points, and curated indices, primary sources, really still essential for discipline-specific research. As I read this out loud, surely we are seeing each day growing interest in using AI and the LLM, enterprise-wide LLM, for deep research. So some comments on that a little bit later. AI is definitely replacing the web for basic research, but curated resources remain essential. We really keep that that view central to much of the work that we've done here at Northeastern. And we really have two tracks that we've invested time and energy into. Track one relates to library licensed tools, and track two relates to enterprise-wide LLM integration. In terms of track one, we have seized upon our agency. We do have a collections budget. We have the agency to license AI-powered discoveries tools, and we've seized upon that agency to explore and license AI-powered platforms. And in fact, we've just come to the end of a contract with one of those platforms and are moving on to explore other options. That exploration has prompted development of numerous processes to track and evaluate AI add-ons to platforms licensed from vendors. And this has been bundled into our existing collections workflows. In terms of track two, we're also tracking the fast-moving and ever-evolving world of openly available MCP connectors, such as PubMed, developed by vendors that could be offered through institutional LLMs. But we've also been seen a need to track, of course, and eventually evaluate those that come with a price tag, those MCP connectors that come with a price tag from a vendor. And this brings me to one of our fundamental tenets that guides our investment of time in the enterprise-wide LLM. And that is to ensure seamless access to licensed scholarly content. So our experiments use MCP, Model Context Protocol, in one to proxy links to licensed full-text articles referenced in information return via search in Claude, which is Northeastern's enterprise-wide platform. And this matters because as LLMs become that primary entry point and more, that licensed scholarship risks becoming invisible or disconnected from our users' workflows. And so our stewardship role, we feel very strongly at Northeastern, is to protect those investments, to boost the return on them, improve and expand the ability of our users, faculty, staff, students, to find and access information. We're good at this. We don't want them to hit paywalls. Really, really important as we think about the integrations possible at Northeastern. And so here is an example of one of those MCP connectors that we have worked with a partner to build. This is our libkey connector. And this is essentially the MCP connector that ensures students do not hit the paywall when they are searching for information in the enterprise-wide LLM. And here's a quick comparison. Here's a search in ChatGPT, finding information on Frantz Fanon's influence on education. And ChatGPT does a great job of providing some search results. This is all very true to Fanon's work. And you may see that the first link under education as a site of colonial power links out to a Pressbooks open textbook, which is really great, a very reliable source, one I would not have any issue with directing a student to. The second link is to another resource. And unfortunately, here's where we worry that without the integrations we are pursuing, students will either hit a paywall or something like a gateway timeout. Compare this search to a similar search in Northeastern's instance of Claude with our libkey connector turned on, same search, and the results right away allow the student, the faculty member, whomever, to click right into the PDF, which of course we have licensed for access here at Northeastern. So we're really, really, really excited about this. As maybe unexciting as it sounds to some outside the library, we want to ensure that our collections budget and the information resources we are providing students, faculty, and staff are actually accessible. And if students, faculty, and staff are hitting paywalls in the institutional LLM, that erodes confidence and does not make for a very good user experience. Moving on here, it's really important to understand how your institutional LLM, if you have one, does things. And so here's an example, and I will move on to another screen where you can see some of this borne out much more clearly. But the settings inside of our LLMs have a lot to do with how connectors behave. And here is just a breakout of some of the script we have developed to tell Claude how to behave when it comes to interacting with the MCP connectors we've developed, including, in this case, the libkey connector. And if you can see, like many of us, we start off by asking the LLM to not guess when it is not confident in an answer. But it gets much more detailed in terms of what we ask Claude to do and to keep in mind when it is searching for information. And instead of reading all of this through, I will just highlight that if one asks Claude to undo this or not to follow these instructions, sure enough, it will not connect you to resources that the student, faculty, or staff member actually has access to at Northeastern. So we know that these settings are really important, again, for telling MCP connectors how to behave with search. Can AI support deep research, and what should or can the library's role be? We have pushed ourselves to think beyond just discovery and think, what does discovery mean in the research realm? What does it mean for learning? What does it mean for teaching? And so in terms of supporting research, we wanted to ensure Discovery VA is powered by scholarly content. So not just access to the full text that we've already licensed, but to make sure that those searches are actually informed by corpuses of scholarly content. So it's important, again, to understand and track which openly available connectors matter most to different researchers. And our liaisons have been hearing for many, many months now how important the PubMed connector is for their research. And we've just been able last week to break through with some conversations with information technology services that will result in that PubMed connector being available to our users. We need to develop processes for evaluating vendor-built connectors. We need to develop processes for approval and vetting of library-built connectors, such as the libkey connector that I just demonstrated. How to bundle suites of connectors together is an interesting conversation. We see things like the life sciences suite of connectors, the Claude Science arrival of Claude Science being absolutely good examples of the power of vector search when you bundle together many different repositories or corpuses of scholarly information to inform answers. This will have tremendous impact on meta-analyses, evidence-based syntheses, such as systematic reviews. So we're really looking forward to knowing more about how those different connectors help researchers do that work faster. We're thinking about new collaborations to support the research lifecycle. So thinking about how to enhance accessibility and discoverability of lab documentation contained currently in ELNs and LIMs, how we might be able to speed up proposal development, and how we might streamline education, training, knowledge sharing, and help mitigate compliance and quality assurance issues in lab turnover. All of these have an angle, an AI angle, and possibly a role for the library. Here's an example of one of the connectors that we have built, which brings together a number of openly available repositories that already exist inside the Claude marketplace, as I call it. And you can see we have 23 tools built in. This is just a snapshot of some of them, and they include some fairly standard, well-known repositories such as Archive, PubMed, BioArchive, etc. So this is one of our tests just to figure out how do we bundle things together and allow a faculty member, staff, whomever, to take advantage of that vector search inside the LLM and get returned a lot of scholarly content. Thinking about new ways of supporting teaching, we have some brilliant staff really doing some great explorations, thinking about teaching modes, course preparation, course design, and really thinking about how to further integrate the library into some of that work. We are driving discovery and adoption of library resources and learning already. How can we use Claude to help further drive the adoption of those things? We are looking and thinking deeply about partners in this space as we share progress on what you see here as our tutorial recommendation module. Thinking about the Center for Advancing Teaching and Learning Through Research, which is that crazy acronym CATLR you see there, an important partner in thinking about how do we reach faculty, and specifically how we generate really meaningful, rich conversations with faculty who are dialed into course prep and course design activities. Of course, working with academic technology, really, really important, information technology services, And as the institution continues to unfurl an AI strategy, how college-based AI stewards may in fact work with us to generate interest and or test some of these tools like the tutorial recommendation module you see here. We are also thinking deeply about how AI will challenge established learning support areas, and specifically digital scholarship and data literacy. No other way to say it, but generative AI tools really do enable complex technical work that many of our libraries have established robust support for over the last 15 plus years. And you can see a description of many of the things users can do now very easily with AI that they used to have to come to the library before. This includes generating transcriptions, text encoding, translation and transcription, metadata enhancement, and so much more. So the technical gap between researchers and library specialists is in fact shrinking. And I would say that the future is not a question of relevance, but really a question of disintermediation. How do we make sure we are in the middle in a meaningful and productive way in the user's journey to finding more information? With that, I will turn it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Evan. So some of what Evan's already mentioned, I'm going to talk about a little bit more. And maybe I've got a series of screenshots that can show some examples of some of what Evan's talking about with AI as a set of tools. But I'm going to take a slightly different approach from what is going on at Northeastern. So I want to start with what is our current strategic plan as a university. And on the left-hand side, you'll see these are quotes taken directly out of our strategic plan. The idea here is that from these quotes is that we are going to become data-informed, insight-driven decision-making culture, but the goal is to leverage the technology as a tool set that helps us get to that point. RPI is predominantly a technological university. We are the oldest engineering school in the United States. And you can see here we have centers that are compute-centric. So on the left-hand side, that is a picture of our supercomputer Amos. And you can see it was designed for processing artificial intelligence. On the right-hand side is our quantum computer, and we like to brag about the fact that we're the only university that actually has its own quantum computer physically on the campus. So with that as the backdrop, the question is, where's the library? What role does the library play here? And we pondered how does the library contribute to these three pillars? The pillars that I'm listing here, they come directly from our strategic plan. Depending upon your institution, its governance, where it reports to, its board of trustees, what your areas of academic and research focus are. You might rename these a little bit differently, but I'm willing to go out on a limb and say you probably have initiatives that are fairly similar to how does the library contribute to student enrollment, the life cycle of a student, research income and output, depending upon if you're a large research institution or even if you're a smaller one that does some research. And then certainly outreach. How do you connect with your alumni, perhaps partnerships with your local government, regional government? What other corporate partnerships might you have as part of fundraising efforts or grant proposal efforts? And then where else can you do, the idea of the town and gown issue that exists for many universities? In what ways do you contribute back to the economics and the culture of your respective local community? So we are a relatively small to mid-sized private university, and we've got, as I kind of indicated, a bunch of researchers that focus on AI. So our goal here is not to recreate the AI wheel. We don't have a very large number of staff. And as a result, while we do have those that know how to program and code and can do a number of things with metadata and with AI, in terms of the actual cycles that they have available, it's not really feasible. We already have researchers that actually, some of our researchers like to brag that they try to break the AI algorithms. So our goal will be in the future to kind of look for possible collaborators amongst our AI researchers. But for the meantime, our focus has been on investing from vendors that have already built um, stable platforms that are AI enabled and AI enhanced. In terms of why we would want to do that and what criteria we're looking at when we look at the various platforms that are available, some of the questions that are listed here, can it speed decision making, going back to what we have in our strategic plan for a university? Can it reduce the amount of time that's required to conduct your research? Can you find the gaps in the research? And can it help us with back to raising funds and extending our research reach? So the library does have representation on an academic AI policy committee. I'm one of the co-chairs. We do have our associate director also sits on this committee. Um, so as a result, we kind of took this approach of we're going to post a LibGuide that talks about AI literacy toolkit. It's a toolkit we adopted from Vanderbilt University, all through Creative Commons. We do provide links to the various tools. You see AI enhanced search tools as one of the options on the left-hand side of the screen. So we do provide direct links to the various tools that we have already licensed through a number of different platforms. So if we look at it from the education side, you might consider AI in the same way that we used to complain about first Alta Vista, then Yahoo, then Google, then Wikipedia. Did any of these tools actually make the library become obsolete? And the answer obviously is no, otherwise we wouldn't even have a session here on choice about libraries. Um, but like all these predecessors, the key here is understanding how those LLMs were created, things like ChatGPT, OpenAI, Gemini, Copilot, etc. And then be able to talk about what are the various strengths and weaknesses of these various tools and be able to show comparisons between what those, I'm going to call them commercial tools, are what they do, what their limits are, and what is available through the various, what I'll call inside the walled garden set of scholarly content, peer-reviewed content that exists within the various platforms that we've already licensed, right? And you could use to kind of frame that conversation much as the same way as we would do with comparing Wikipedia in the early days of its existence. You could use the ACRL scholarship as a conversation, the framework, the information literacy framework, as a way to position why you would use this particular tool that the library is licensed versus some other tool that's just out there. Even using, Google has now enhanced a lot of their search functionality with AI, and there was actually an article that indicates that people are actually spending more time using Google's AI and living within, or, continuing their conversations within Google's AI as opposed to clicking out to the various links that Google was supposed to, provide links to that was kind of driving traffic, driving click-throughs. So, as I mentioned, I have a series of screenshots. I'm going to kind of go through a number of different examples of the content and the platforms that we've enabled. Um, so this is a screenshot of our EBSCO Discovery service. We are a WMS shop for our ILS, but we prefer to use EBSCO's Discovery service as the discovery layer as opposed to using WorldCat. And here what we've got is an example of EDS, and we've enabled, you can see the AI Insights icon here turned on. So I've just done a search for quantum computing, and one of the results here is a particular article, and it gives me some insights of what's inside that article. It's in a sense kind of an abstract summary. We also provide here a link on the side here. This is our chatbot, and it goes to our Ask Us 24/7 chatbot. So you have the opportunity to interact with a librarian directly should there be any questions that you have using this tool. Um, So in using this tool, what you see here is it's a kind of we view it as a teachable moment for an undergraduate. So you're not just looking for a good resource. The questions now become, is this relevant to what the student might be looking for? And what are some additional avenues of inquiry that can be considered, right? So we have other subjects that are presented here, as well as just a quick summary of what is quantum computing. Um, so this kind of helps in terms of the direction of where a student could go in starting to, they have to write a paper on quantum computing, for example. So here's another screenshot. This is using JSTOR's AI-enabled sets of functionality. So you can see I've turned on the AI research tool. I did a query here for the composer Johann Sebastian Bach and the question of parody, basically borrowing ideas from other composers. It came up with a book chapter, and it does tell me here in the summary, the AI specifies, um, do I want to know more? Well, the text, and I said, yeah, does the text actually refer to borrowing and repurposing of musical ideas? And the AI can tell me, well, it kind of sort of does, but it says so within this particular context. What other questions do I want to ask? And the next screen shows me, well, here's some other topics that I could start to look at if I want to get more specific and get beyond the context that's sort of limited in the result that I chose from JSTOR. Again, an opportunity to apply some critical thinking skills, right? To analyze, what did the summary tell me? Is it really relevant to what I'm looking for, or are there other directions that I can start to pursue in conducting research? So this is a screenshot, totally different topic, not humanities. I wanted to know more about Amazon. And the question here was, how has the existence of Amazon and its business model changed online shopping? And this is just a subset of a very large report that was generated by the AI. I have citations that are listed here, and I can click on those and go out to those citations and get to the exact particular articles. Um, but what is really interesting is as I continue down the report, whoops, here we go. I also get a conclusion, and once again, this is in Nexus Uni, I have the ability to explore some other particular directions. So I have a summary with citations, with peer-reviewed citations, but then what are the other things that I might consider as part of a research activity? Again, if I have to write a report, I do have the ability to generate a particular report at the bottom here. But again, sort of an opportunity to get a student to think beyond what they might have just generated, as a set of results coming out of Google or again, Copilot or any of the other commercial platforms. This screenshot is a tool called a writing coach. It does not write my papers for me. What I've done here, this text sitting here in the center, this text is text that I've written. And what the writing coach starts to do is kind of analyze the text and say, well, here's some references that might support or contradict what it is that you're trying to assert in your text. You see here on the claim radar, this is a sample of text that came right out of the text that I entered in the center, right? And it can tell me what references, if I clicked on this, this would tell me what references exist that might actually support that claim. This would be great to then verify and have appropriate citations of what it is that I'm writing a paper. This helps me with identifying accuracy. And once again, I view this as kind of a critical analysis, critical thinking opportunity to get a student to think about the scholarship as a conversation, right? I have this idea. What is behind my idea that is actually supportive or contradicts my particular idea? Are there multiple opinions that exist out there besides what I'm asserting? So on the research side, if I look at it from somebody who's a seasoned researcher, and going back to what we have in our strategic plan as a university, how can I reduce the amount of manual labor? And if you think about the way research is conducted, there's kind of the finding process, right? I have this idea, I have this theory, I have a hypothesis. How do I know that nobody else has actually done this, or is there evidence around what I'm thinking about that again is either supportive or contradicts it, or what are some of the other processes similar to what I'm considering? Has somebody else done a set of experiments like what I'm considering doing? I want to find collaborators if I'm looking for research opportunities in an increasingly competitive and more restrictive federal funding and corporate funding environment for ongoing research. Finding funding, finding collaborators, finding funding opportunities. View is that research is now not usually defined by a singular discipline, but it's actually become multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. So again, having that ability to find collaborators and finding opportunities more quickly in a competitive market, we think is an advantage for us. The bottom question here in bold, will it foster changes in the research workflow? We believe it will, but yet to be determined. So again, some more screenshots that I have here. I asked for the question this is the Elsevier LeapSpace product, and I'm looking for information about H. pylori. It's a bacteria. It's a pretty nasty one. I know there's quite a bit we're all talking about cyclospora these days. This is sort of in the same realm. And I wanted to know kind of just a quick summary, what's the background on how do you diagnose and treat when you have a patient with H. pylori? I get some quick answers, a quick introduction. What I want to show here is a claim radar, which I showed earlier for the student purpose, but here I get a summary of there are 30 related documents that support what is being that support the predominant set of findings that are found in the scholarly literature. There may be some that have some mixed results, in favor of what's the predominant findings, or maybe something somewhat contradictory. And then there's definitely here 6 articles that are that can contradict what have been the primary findings that are found in the literature. What I like about this, and what I think a researcher would also like, is the transparency. It shows how was this search result generated? What was the AI process behind this? And it shows the number of the kind of metadata analysis and the number of steps that were taken, as well as what kind of research, the kind of research that's documented in the articles, right? So, clinical trials, diagnostic tools. So, in terms of speeding the research, in a sense, this is kind of the first step of a literature review. And what we're able to do with this would normally take hours, perhaps even days to conduct something like this. And in terms of speeding and cutting down the time, this is something that gets done in a matter of minutes. Doing the same kind of thing, but looking in this particular case, I'm looking at this is lupus. And here the analysis is slightly different. What I'm showing is a table that shows these things are all grouped by what each source is mainly useful for. So this is grouping references you can see here, and it gives what's the best use, right? So this was for diagnostic standardization. This is for diagnostic marker detail of lupus. This is for the interpretation of the diagnosis and validation of the diagnosis. So again, now I have a set of subcategories and subclassifications within the scholarly literature that can help me in terms of considering what I want to do, whether I'm looking at this from a clinical standpoint, clinical treatment standpoint, I'm looking at this from a research standpoint. And also up here, I only chose a few of the clusters from the citations, but you can see there's over 70 citations behind this report. Uh, Another way to analyze the literature that's being cited in these types of reports, here on the far left-hand side, I have a link that goes right out to that referenced article. Here's an abstract of the article. This gives me a summary of what research methods were actually documented in this particular article. This gives me a summary of the result sets and a conclusion. And I can look at multiple articles. Let's say I had 10 to 20 articles that are in the results set from this report. And I want this kind of breakdown to help me quickly analyze. This is kind of a different sort of critical thinking and exercise, but it's a critical thinking exercise that is once again sped up by the fact that I have the ability to conduct this kind of analysis and type of comparison in the resources that are being cited. So this screen, our campus does not have an enterprise-wide license to a single platform. Our business school does have a license just to ChatGPT. I was given access to that particular license, so I decided let's do a comparison. I'm going to ask ChatGPT a question, and I'm going to ask the very same question of one of our licensed AI-enabled tools in the library. So the question here is, what strategic processes have enabled new ventures to disrupt established industries? And looking really quickly, one of the references is this organization called the Clayton Christensen Institute, which tends to be it's a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization founded on the theories of the late Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen. There's no immediate answer or citation to scholarly research. What I also want to point out is that what it labels here is a strategic process that's behind the answer. This is not how the answer came, how the AI came up with the answer. It's giving a summary of what's the strategic process that's applied. This particular strategic process that was part of my question. By comparison, here's what I get out of one of our tools. And I asked the exact same question: what strategic processes enable new ventures? The strategic processes that are detailed here are far more detailed. Plus, I have a series of citations that are part of the scholarly communications network and peer-reviewed research with a direct answer. And then these are all the references that came out of that report. Again, very different than what ChatGPT provides me. This is back to EBSCO's discovery service with natural language and the AI insights enabled. What I want to show here is that I'm looking for a collaborator, and I've got this author of this particular article. It's a peer-reviewed conference paper. We can see that this particular author has been cited in Scopus. I want to find out more information about this particular author. What other areas, disciplines do they research? What areas or what other topics have they been an author on? By clicking on that particular link, I then get to this piece of information that provides me access to their information about their ORCID profile, as well as some additional data out of OpenAlex and the ROR. I see that there's a whole bunch of different disciplines in which this individual has been covering as topics, has been a co-author. I now start to see the co-author network. Again, the idea here is that we're going to shorten the amount of time that's required to find this particular information, and we know that it's coming from authoritative sources. In terms of looking for grant opportunities, I plugged in, hey, I'm looking for grant support globally for material science research. And you can see from this quick reference table, here's some key findings. They're broken down into these various categories, right? Funding patterns, strategic models, funding distribution, again, with citations. What I also liked is that it also tells me what was the method by which it came up with that table. Here's the trends. here are some limitations and assumptions that were part that the AI involved, that the AI considered when putting together that table. And again, knowing those limitations, here's some recommendations for some other research to pursue to find out more information about grant opportunities. This is my last screenshot. Our Vice President for Research asked, how can I demonstrate the impact of RPI on high performance computing? The tool I used wasn't supposed to be able to do this, but it actually did it for me, and I'm quite grateful that it actually did this for me. This would have taken me quite a bit of time to put this together, but I have here a quick summary answer about what our researchers have contributed to the development and innovations in high performance computing. I have a list of all the citations. I have the time period I asked for the last decade. Again, would have taken me hours, days to put this all together and then to come up with a summary. It lays out the methodology, once again, that the AI used to try to figure out and come up with this summary. My last slide is our rollout for many of the AI things that I've showed you. Some of these functions, or actually most of these functions, got turned on towards the end of our academic calendar year in the spring semester. So we have not actually made public announcements about many of these things. And that's because we didn't want to bombard everybody during finals week and writing your final papers that, well, here's a whole new set of tools that you should start using and start to learn. But what I do want to show here is that even though we haven't publicized these tools, they are still being used. So people are finding these tools and they are using them. So I believe my time is up. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Emily. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you to Evan. Two really interesting presentations on search and discovery. And it's really extraordinary to think about where we were like 2, 3 years ago and where we are now. It really strikes me watching both your presentations, how much user behavior has changed, how much the environment has changed, and how routine AI has become in so many of our students and researchers' lives right now. So we do have plenty of time for some questions. Thank you, everyone, for the questions you've already put into the Q&A. I see we've got a fair number already, which is fantastic. I also want to remind you that you can, of course, add more questions, but you can also read through the ones that we have and upvote anything that you really would like us to get to. We will get to as many questions as we can. I am going to read them out in the order in which they're upvoted. So that's your incentive to upvote, just to make sure that we're getting to the things people really want to hear answers to. So I'll also point out that this last slide, we have some QR codes up here. One is for Elsevier's LeapSpace researcher AI tool that was one of the tools that Andrew highlighted, and also the Researcher of the Future report, Elsevier's survey that came out last year, and you're welcome to look at that as well. So with that, let me just go ahead. I'm going to sort these questions by upvotes. The one with the overwhelming number of upvotes, 32 upvotes on this question, goes to you, Evan. And it is, what kind of in-house developer expertise did you need to have in the library in order to build the MCP connector?
Well, certainly, which I think is probably the case in all of our libraries, some basic fluency or advanced fluency in bibliographic data, the kinds of library systems, platforms, integrations that many of our libraries have already done and work on all the time. So I think that the baseline, knowledge base for that across our libraries is probably quite similar. So I'm sorry I can't get into the specifics of the technical knowledge, right, that our developers have. However, this is as much a choice of what we decide to spend our time on and allocate time towards as it is a matter of technical expertise. And I'm saying that confident that, again, most of our system staff, our developer folks, will be able to read about model context protocol. And with their existing knowledge, again, of library systems, will be able to make an assessment, right, of how much maybe extra help they might need. But I think some basic work can be done in all of our libraries with MCP. This is a matter of whether or not, in a way, we are going to allow or challenge or charge our systems folks, our developer teams with this. And so we're very lucky that we, in our library, we shared amongst a wide pool of staff here, shared a belief that we would strengthen our library's position and to the benefit of all of our users in our Northeastern community if we leaned in and explored some of these integrations. And I will say it was actually a meeting with Anthropic staff last summer where a lot of interest and excitement was shown by them at the thought of ensuring that full text links were present in the enterprise-wide LLM. They were excited about that idea. And I think seeing that take off as a kernel of excitement there, more than a kernel, gave us some impetus for, again, allocating that time and challenging and charging with our staff with figuring out what some of these integrations would look like. Model Context Protocol is an open protocol, and there is a lot of documentation out there. There are a lot of libraries, more than just Northeastern, who are working on it. And so I think the community is really starting to grow together in terms of shared knowledge about how to move ahead with such integrations.
Thank you. Perfect. Good question. There's a follow-up here similarly about the Northeastern integration asking, will this instance of Claude at Northeastern replace the library's discovery layer or the library catalog?
We think that it probably will. We know that most users are not starting there anyways, probably the case for most of our libraries. We are in a development partnership with Clarivate, which is the discovery, we use Primo as a discovery layer and are working on how to make sure those bibliographic holdings are discoverable in Claude. However, again, back to choices. We felt that it was more important, and this is a stance born of limited capacity, limited staff capacity, and we are serving 55,000 FTE at Northeastern. That choice was born in part of looking at the value of, again, making sure that full text was able to be connected to or that accessible within Claude. Rather than discovering titles that the library had. And I'm glossing over a lot there, but our investment we thought was much more strategic. Again, if we were able to maximize use of full text as opposed to finding ways to represent the library catalog inside Claude. Again, that is coming and we're excited for it and we think users will make great use of it. And some of our tests already shows that it does a wonderful job of working through what we are used to looking at on the left-hand side as a bunch of facets to get to the format that you want or the time range that you want. So it does that really, really well. We're a little bit more excited, I would have to say, about the opportunity to connect students and faculty to full text. And related to that, some of the ideas I think that Andrew shared specific to how we might speed up research, including finding collaborators and finding the gaps. Those are really, really compelling modes of work and where places where we want to explore more with our community. But we're excited about the catalog piece for sure.
Yeah, great. Next question with 34 upvotes. I'm going to pass this one to you, Andrew, to see if you have any thoughts on this. Some academic libraries are adding or changing job positions that reflect titles like AI librarian, AI literacy librarian. And what are your thoughts on this trend? Is it a good idea? Is it not? Is it a flash in the pan? Curious as to how you're thinking about this at RPI.
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of a flash in the pan. If we think about the various titles we've had in the profession, we've had things like the Scholarly Communications Librarian. We've had the Research Data Management Librarian. The reason I think it's a flash in the pan is that, as Evan's already pointed out, and we kind of see trend-wise, the library, that degree of specialization, that's going to kind of be eroded by the fact that what AI is actually doing is, in a sense, is kind of merging a lot of that, what we would have considered highly specialized knowledge base or assignment for a job position, and it's kind of merging it all together. So, some of the tools that I showed you, if I said, well, I need a research data management librarian for this, well, I could easily see with some of the connectors that Evan's shown, he's already shown connectors to archive. So if I know where the article is, it's just a matter of a couple of clicks and I'm going to find a research deposited data set somewhere. Do I actually need a particular librarian for that? Now, there could be a variability here, and that is that at a large, publicly funded R1, where you actually do have an institutional repository with OER and all kinds of stuff, you may actually want somebody that has that title. At a smaller institution like mine, it's not really a feasible title for us, especially we don't even have an institutional repository for research data management. So I think, again, I think as we watch the technology evolve, I think we're going to keep changing these titles. But I also think that the answer is somewhat dependent upon what's the size and structure of your respective institution.
Great. Yeah, that's a really good point. It really depends on the library, and I think we've seen these sorts of trends. Do you guys remember emerging technology librarian? That was like a really trendy. No one really knew what it was, but it seemed like you needed to have one back in like 2005. You know, then it
I
went away.
Yeah, I do remember there was a time we called some librarians in some areas, we called them knowledge managers, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, so titles come and go, but the work stays the same. We support our students and our faculty, right? Yeah, great. Let's see if we can get to a couple more. So the next one, um, let's see, I'm gonna direct this one to you as well, Andrew, if you want to be the first one to take a stab at Laura's question here. How best can an academic library educate or address the campus on licensing restrictions and copyright concerns with faculty and students' use of licensed content in AI? And she points out we have limited ability to send campus-wide emails by design. I think many academic departments struggle with that. So I don't know if you want to take a stab at that one.
yeah, actually, I've got a couple of real life examples. So we had a faculty member who actually asked for an API from one of our tools and uh, said, well, I want this API because I want to harvest this information as a way to conduct my research. And the answer was, well, you can conduct your research. I can't give you the API access. I'm not licensed to give you that API, but you can conduct the research. And here's a set of AI tools that we already have that can enable you to conduct that research and kind of gather what you're trying to gather in a short period of time. So that's an example. The answer, I believe, is part of your AI policy. And as I mentioned, I'm co-chair for an academic AI policy, but there are many other AI policies that we have. So there's a cybersecurity AI policy that we have at RPI. There is it's all under our legal counsel. So there are certain things that we say under legal agreements, we're not allowed to do X, Y, and Z. So my recommendation would be rather than the library, as you say, sending out individual emails to all these individuals who are trying to do X or Y with licensed content, there should be just a broader institutional statement. We've all signed a variety of agreements with our various platforms that say this is what you can do and what you can't do. And my recommendation would be to kind of post that globally so that rather than the library doing one-offs to answer all these questions, you can point to a particular policy as a way to solve it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think governance and policy is a huge topic right now on so many campuses, right, where everyone is struggling to ensure that everyone is being safe and keeping their institution safe when it comes to these tools. Let's do one more question, and then I think we're going to be at time. Let's shoot this one over to you, Evan, if you don't mind. How do you check the accuracy of the sources AI identifies? Have you gone through the steps of looking up each of them and comparing them to the summaries and topics provided by AI?
Great question. I do not have a document or a deck that would prove to you any rigor in this area. But suffice to say, there's vigorous exploration across many groups of staff in the library. Our liaisons are the experts at that sort of comparison. And I know as part of our evaluation process for vendor add-ons to discipline specific or interdisciplinary platforms we've licensed, there has been a great deal of analysis of comparing those kinds of search results and trying to trace back, citations to their source. This conversation in our library actually dates back to the fall of 2023, where I keep pinned to the top of my inbox a lengthy email from one of our fantastic political science librarians, where they outline or provide me with a list of hallucinated citations that a student passed along to her. Yes, this was a few years ago now, but I still hold that up as early indication of how we were in a way forced to do the kind of analysis that was asked about just now. And I know that that continues, liaison to a liaison. We are being faced with many of those kinds of questions, and also trying to get ahead of that by through the lens of information literacy, by addressing that sort of critical thinking in the classroom in terms of our course support.
Yeah, great point. Information literacy and AI literacy is such a huge part of this picture. I want to say thank you to both Evan and Andrew for their time today, for their expertise, two really excellent presentations. I wish we had more time to get to all the questions, but I'm happy we got to at least some of them. Thank you to all of the participants for their questions, for their engagement throughout the webinar. And over to you, Sabrina, to close us out. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, I'll just echo you and say thanks so much to Evan, Emily, and Andrew for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to our attendees for your questions and your comments. We really appreciate your engagement. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice with links to the recording and today's slides. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the webinar and hope to see you again soon on another session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye.